She was drowning in more than just water, and the man who saved her didn't even know her last name, could buy the whole valley. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind had a bite to it that didn't match the calendar. Spring wasn't supposed to feel like this. Sharp and sudden, like the sky had a grudge. James Whitaker sat high in the seat of his old John Deere, engine rumbling beneath him, as he worked his way down the last stretch of soil on the south field. He didn't trust forecasts, not really. But even the rusted radio duct-taped to the tractor's dash had started to spit warnings over the static, flash flood advisory, heavy rains moving in from the west. He'd heard it before. More often than not, it meant a passing drizzle and a few muddied boots. Still, the clouds were darker than they'd been this morning, bruised and boiling like something was building behind them. His hat tugged at the wind, flapping against the side of his head, but he didn't slow down. He had 3 more rows left, just 3. The kind of rows that didn't look like much to someone with a checkbook for hands, but to James, they were his line in the sand. His father's ashes were buried under the sycamore tree beyond this field. He wasn't about to let that soil go untended. Not now, not ever. Mud clung to the tractor's tires like it had something to prove. With each pass, the scent of wet earth rose thick around him, rich, honest, unforgiving. The kind of smell city folk bottled into candles and sold for $20 a pop. But here, it was real, tangible. It meant something. James leaned forward, squinting at the horizon. The first raindrops smacked against his windshield like impatient fingers. 1, 2. Then all at once a curtain of water swept across the fields, swallowing the sky whole. Still, he didn't stop, not until lightning split the clouds above the ridge and thunder rolled in like Judgment Day. Only then did he ease off the throttle, not because he was afraid, but because the soil had begun to slosh under the wheels. Even stubbornness had its limits. He turned the tractor toward the barn, wiping the water from his brow. That's when he heard it. A voice, distant, panicked, rising over the storm's roar. Someone was out there. The scream didn't sound human at first, just another cry in the storm, like the wind itself was breaking apart. James squinted into the downpour, heart kicking into a rhythm faster than the tractor's old engine ever managed. He killed the ignition and jumped down, boots hitting the soaked earth with a splash that swallowed the sound of his landing. The rain was coming sideways now, lashing across his face, blurring everything into gray and shadow. Then he saw her, a figure near the edge of the lower pasture, where the creek had turned violent. It was no longer a gentle trickle winding through wild grass. It was a churning beast, overflowing its banks, ripping through barbed wire and fence posts like paper straws. And there, half submerged, was a woman. Her hands clung to the splintered edge of a fence post, knuckles white against the brown surge of water. Her hair was plastered across her face, dark as the storm above, and her body shook with every wave that crashed into her. James didn't hesitate. He tore across the field, knees nearly buckling in the mud. The current had swallowed the back pasture entirely. If she slipped, she'd be gone in seconds. The land he'd walked his whole life suddenly felt like foreign terrain, unpredictable, dangerous, unfamiliar. "Hold on!" he yelled, voice hoarse over the roar of wind and water. She didn't answer, but her eyes locked on his, a flicker of raw fear and desperate hope. Her grip slipped once, and James nearly dove right then, boots be damned. But she caught herself, struggling to keep her head above the water. James reached the edge, bracing himself against a downed limb for balance, one hand outstretched. "Take it!" he shouted. She hesitated, not out of fear, but exhaustion. She looked like she'd already been fighting for too long, but somehow she reached. Fingers brushed, gripped, held. With a growl of effort, James hauled her toward him, legs digging into the mud for traction, his shoulders screaming as he pulled, and then she collapsed into him, soaked and shivering, but alive. Neither of them spoke. The storm kept raging, but between their gasps for air and the pounding of the rain, something quieter passed between them, something that didn't need words. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked, not the polite kind of shiver that fades once you're dry, but the deep, bone-deep kind, the kind that came from fear, from cold, from holding on too long. James didn't say anything. He just peeled off his thick canvas coat, still dripping at the hem, and wrapped it around her shoulders without ceremony. It swallowed her whole. She didn't thank him, maybe because her lips were too blue to form words. They trudged back to the tractor in silence, the storm still spitting rain in wild fits. She stumbled once, and James caught her elbow, steadying her with hands that had set fence posts, rebuilt engines, buried his father. She didn't pull away. The tractor cab was barely big enough for one, but she folded in beside him, legs trembling and soaked boots squelching. He reached for the old wool blanket he kept behind the seat and draped it over her knees. The engine groaned as it came to life, and the heater coughed up weak warmth like a tired old dog trying to help. The drive to the farmhouse was slow, careful. Water pooled in every ditch, and tree limbs littered the dirt road like fallen bones. James kept one hand on the wheel, the other ready near her shoulder in case she started to slump. Every few seconds she let out a wet, rattling cough that made him glance her way. Her face was pale, more than just cold. Her eyes fluttered, dazed. Whoever she was, she didn't belong out here, not in a storm like this. "You got a name?" he asked, just loud enough to be heard. She blinked slowly, then cleared her throat. "Elena," she rasped. He nodded once, didn't ask for more. By the time they pulled up to the old white farmhouse, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. James cut the engine and looked over. She was staring out the windshield, like the world outside was something she didn't quite recognize. He helped her down, one arm around her back as she leaned against him. She didn't ask where they were, didn't seem to care. She just let herself be led, step by step, across the porch, through the front door, into the warmth. And James, still dripping, still muddy, still catching his breath, had no idea that the woman he just pulled from floodwater had once made the cover of Forbes. The storm hadn't passed. It had just quieted, like it was catching its breath before round two. Rain still hammered the tin roof in waves, and every so often a gust of wind would rattle the window panes like a warning. But inside the old farmhouse, the world had gone still. James knelt by the hearth, feeding split logs into the fire one at a time. The flames caught with a soft whoosh, orange light dancing across the wooden floorboards, and the edges of the flannel blanket cocooned around the stranger on his couch. She hadn't said much after they got inside, just coughed a few times, then let herself sink into the cushions like her body had nothing left to give. He'd given her dry clothes, an old hoodie of his and a pair of flannel pajama pants that had once belonged to his sister. She was drowning in the fabric, her frame small beneath the layers, but at least she wasn't shivering anymore. James stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and glanced over at her. She was asleep, or something close to it. Her breathing had evened out, soft and shallow, her head resting on a throw pillow that looked older than both of them. Her dark hair was drying in messy strands across her cheek, and for a second, just a second, she looked like someone who had grown up here, like someone who belonged. He turned away before the thought could finish forming. Instead, he busied himself with quiet things, making tea he knew she wouldn't drink right away, picking up boots she'd left by the door, tossing her soaked coat over the back of a chair. The house smelled of wet wool and firewood now, with a faint trace of lavender from the drawer sachets his mother had insisted on years ago. Outside, the rain picked up again, slanting sideways across the porch. But in here, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the breath of a woman who hadn't told him who she really was. And James hadn't asked. He wasn't one to pry. Not on the first night. The morning crept in slowly, dragging streaks of pale light through the clouds that still hovered heavy and low over the hills. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, more memory than threat now, tapping gently against the window glass like it was sorry for the night before. James was already up, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, boots crossed at the ankles, as he sat on the edge of the porch. He didn't make a sound, just sipped, stared out at the fog that hugged the pasture, and listened to the house settle behind him. She appeared in the doorway not long after, barefoot, hoodie sleeves covering half her hands, and sleep still soft in her expression. Her hair was tangled, eyes shadowed but alert. For a moment she just stood there, as if unsure if she should speak or stay invisible a little longer. "You sleep all right?" James asked, not turning his head. There was a pause. "Yeah," she said finally, voice still hoarse. "Thanks. For everything." He gave a small nod, then tilted the mug toward her. "Coffee's hot. Not fancy." "I'll take it," she said, stepping barefoot onto the porch with a quiet wince at the cold boards. He handed her the spare mug without ceremony. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't beg to be filled, just breath and coffee and a world still waking up. Eventually she spoke again, so softly he almost missed it. "Elena." James turned slightly, brow raised. "My name," she said, wrapping both hands around the mug. "Elena." She didn't offer a last name, no mention of who she was, where she came from, or why she'd been alone on a back road in a $1,000 coat with no umbrella. But the way she said it, the way she looked at him when she did, it didn't feel like omission, it felt like permission. James held her gaze a beat too long, then gave a simple, quiet response. "James?" She smiled, a small curve that barely reached her eyes, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. The sun was trying its best to break through the overcast sky, spilling weak light across the wet fields like a half-hearted apology. Inside the farmhouse, the smell of something burnt was making a stubborn case for attention. James leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Elena wrestle with the toaster like it had personally insulted her. "I swear I set it to medium," she muttered, holding up 2 blackened slices of bread with a look of betrayal. James didn't say a word, just reached for the trash can, opened it with his boot, and let her drop the evidence inside. "It's harder than it looks," she said, trying not to sound defensive. "It's toast," James replied, deadpan, and then he smiled. The first real one in weeks. The kind that didn't just touch his mouth, but worked its way up into his eyes, like something he hadn't felt in a long time had quietly stirred awake. Elena caught it, and for a moment her shoulders relaxed. She'd offered to help with breakfast, said she didn't like feeling useless. He'd handed her a spatula and let her at it, not expecting much. Now the eggs were borderline edible, the bacon somehow both underdone and overcooked, and the toast had died a quick, fiery death. Still, she had tried. In that expensive hoodie and borrowed flannel pants, barefoot and tousled, she looked more human than any photo of her ever had. James poured them both a second cup of coffee. "I'll handle breakfast tomorrow," he said, sliding a plate toward her. "Fair," she admitted, poking at her eggs. After breakfast, they stepped out onto the porch. The tow truck had arrived, the driver poking around the wrecks of her SUV. It looked even worse in daylight, mud-caked, dented, the engine compartment crumpled like paper. "She's done," the guy said. "This'll be a shop job for sure, if it's even worth saving." Elena nodded slowly, like she'd known that already, like she'd accepted it before she even crawled out of the floodwater. James stood beside her. "Guess you're grounded here a while?" She didn't look upset. Maybe that's not the worst thing. He glanced at her again, that smile ghosting back. "Not the worst at all." The morning light slanted through the kitchen window, catching on the chipped ceramic mug in James's hand and painting golden lines across the wood grain of the table. The storm had moved on. Outside, the field still held puddles, but the air smelled cleaner now, like something had been scrubbed away during the night. Elena sat across from him, quiet, thoughtful, fingers curled around her own mug like she was anchoring herself with the warmth. Neither of them had said much after the tow truck left. The SUV was gone, hauled off to a shop 2 towns over where the mechanic had looked at the damage and winced. James had offered to call in a favor. Elena had simply nodded. Now the silence felt full, but not uncomfortable. James was used to silence, preferred it most days. Elena broke it gently. "I know I never asked what you charge, but—" She reached into the pocket of her coat, still draped over the back of her chair, and pulled out a sleek black wallet. From it, a platinum card, the kind that practically whispered money. She slid it across the table. For the repairs, the ride, the clothes, everything. James didn't even glance at the card. He just gave a small shake of his head and nudged it back toward her with 2 fingers. "We don't charge for being decent." Her brow furrowed. "But you've done more than you had to. Most people wouldn't have stopped, let alone—" "I'm not most people." That stopped her. His voice hadn't changed, still low and steady, but there was something final in it. Not cold, just honest. She let out a breath. "You don't know who I am." He leaned back slightly. "Don't need to." She studied him, really studied him, like she was trying to figure out what made someone like that exist in a world like this. And maybe for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like her name could solve a thing. She slipped the card back into her wallet without another word. "And James?" He stood, refilled her mug, and said, "Cream's in the fridge if you want it." Like nothing had happened at all. The morning smelled like damp hay and wood smoke, with a breeze that still carried last night's storm in its lungs. James stepped into the barn first, familiar boots thudding against packed dirt, every movement smooth and unthinking, years of habit pressed into bone. Behind him, Elena followed with cautious steps, tugging at the sleeves of her hoodie and adjusting the oversized boots she'd borrowed. They flopped awkwardly around her ankles like a child playing dress-up, but she hadn't complained once. "I want to help," she had said over breakfast, before he could protest. "Let me do something useful." Now she stood just inside the barn doorway, surveying the scene like it was another country. He handed her a feed bucket. "Chickens first. Don't let them intimidate you." "I've seen hostile boardrooms," she replied with a smirk. "How bad can a few birds be?" 5 minutes later the answer was, bad enough. The chickens swarmed as soon as she stepped into the pen, clucking and flapping, beady eyes locked on the grain. One particularly assertive hen pecked at her boot. Elena yelped, laughed, then accidentally tipped the bucket, scattering feed like confetti. "They're aggressive," she called out, trying to shuffle back without falling. "They're hungry," James replied, arms crossed, watching from the fence with an amused half-smile. "Same thing, really." Eventually, she got the hang of it, sort of. She crouched, refilled the trough, talked to the chickens like they were colleagues. James wasn't sure what surprised him more, her determination or the way her laughter echoed through the barn like it belonged there. Later, they moved on to the goats. Elena held out a handful of pellets, only to have a shaggy brown one leap up and knock her clean into the mud. She hit the ground with a splash, boots flailing, hoodie soaked. For a second, she just sat there, mud streaked across her knees, hair in her face. And then she laughed. Not the polite kind, not the curated soft chuckle of someone used to cameras. It was full, messy, and honest, like she hadn't felt that free in years. James offered her a hand. "Still want to help?" She took it, grinning. "Absolutely." The sky had cleared by afternoon, a wide stretch of pale blue stretching over the fields like a breath finally released. Inside the farmhouse, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, falling across the table in soft stripes. James was outside, mending a broken gate near the pasture. Elena sat alone, elbows on the worn tabletop, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. In front of her sat the phone, charged now, fully, awake and buzzing with the life she'd left behind. It had taken a full day to dry out. James had set it near the fireplace last night, just in case she needed it. He didn't ask questions. He hadn't once asked about who she was, or where she came from, or why a woman with a silk-lined coat and shoes that weren't meant for dirt roads had ended up clinging to a fence post on his property. He just handed her the phone this morning like it was a hammer or a jar of preserves. No strings, no assumptions. Now, its screen glared up at her with a sterile urgency. 37 missed calls, 12 voicemails, 4 text messages from her assistant marked urgent, another from someone at the firm that said simply, "Are you alive?" She scrolled through them once, read none of them. It felt like watching someone else's life unfold. There was a time when a single missed call would have sent her into a tailspin, where silence was weakness and a moment offline was a crack in the armor. But here, in this quiet farmhouse, with the faint scent of firewood and the sound of chickens scratching in the distance, her priorities didn't feel as heavy. They just floated. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could call, she could explain. She could step right back into the engine of her old life and let it roar around her again. Instead, she pressed the button on the side and watched the screen go dark. Then she placed the phone face down on the table and slid it to the edge, away from her tea, away from her thoughts. Outside, James hammered something into place. Inside, Elena let the silence hold. The evening had crept in slow and quiet, golden light stretching long across the fields as the sun dipped behind the western hills. James sat at the kitchen table with a worn manila folder in front of him, edges frayed, corners softened from years of being opened and shut too many times. He didn't want to show her, hadn't planned on it, but when Elena asked why the barn roof leaked or why he hadn't fixed the busted fence near the south pasture, he didn't give excuses. He simply opened the drawer, pulled out the folder, and said, "You want to know? Then look." She sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap like she was preparing for a briefing. But this wasn't a polished presentation. No sleek charts, no curated talking points, just paper after paper, stained, torn, smudged with ink and fingerprints and time. A letter from the bank, another one, red stamps, deadlines, auction warnings, past due notices on the grain supplier account. He didn't speak as she flipped through it all, just sat back in his chair, jaw tight, eyes watching the floor. "This place has been in my family for 3 generations," he said finally. "My dad kept it going after the droughts in the 70s. I took over after he passed. Thought I could hold it together." Elena looked up, her gaze softer now. "You've been holding it together." "Barely." He gave a humorless laugh. "The equipment's older than I am. Every month's a coin toss. One busted axle or sick calf, and it all topples." She glanced toward the window, where dusk was settling over the fields like a blanket. From the outside, the farm looked solid, timeless even. But inside these papers was a man walking a tightrope without a net, trying to keep something alive not because it was profitable, but because it mattered. "This isn't failure," she said quietly, resting a hand on the stack. "This is survival." James didn't respond right away, just met her eyes. And for a moment, Elena didn't see a farmer clinging to a crumbling legacy. She saw a man building something sacred with nothing but grit, calloused hands, and hope that refused to die. The mailbox at the end of the gravel road always creaked when opened, like it resented bad news as much as the man who checked it. That morning, James trudged through the dew-covered grass, boots soaking, mind already buried in the day's work. The sun was just crawling above the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch behind him. When he pulled the rust-speckled box open, the envelope was sitting there like it had been waiting, cream-colored, stamped in red. No surprise, he didn't open it. Not there. Just slid it into the pocket of his flannel shirt and walked back up to the house, shoulders heavier with each step. The coffee hadn't even brewed yet, and already the day had a weight he didn't have the strength to carry. Inside, he set the envelope on the kitchen counter. For a while it sat there untouched, like a guest no one wanted to acknowledge. He finally opened it while Elena was out back, feeding the goats. No need for her to see it, no need for her to ask. The letter was short, direct. 30 days until foreclosure proceedings begin. 30 days to either pay up or watch everything, land, house, barn, put on the block. It didn't threaten. It didn't beg. just stated a fact, cold and quiet. James folded it once, slid it into the bottom drawer near the sink, beneath a pile of old receipts and seed catalogs, out of sight. That's where it belonged. But later that evening, as he came in from patching the coop, Elena was already inside, the drawer half open, the letter in her hand. He froze. She didn't look up at first, just read, lips pressed into a pale line. When she finally met his gaze, there wasn't pity in her eyes. There was fury, quiet, controlled fury, not at him, but at a world that let men like James break themselves to keep something good alive. "You were just going to wait it out?" she asked, voice steady. He shrugged. "I've done more with less." She set the letter down gently. "Not anymore. You don't have to do this alone." He didn't answer, just turned away. But something cracked in the silence between them, and this time he wasn't sure it was a bad thing. The porch creaked under their chairs as the morning settled in, slow and gold, and full of that rare kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. The sun was just beginning to spill over the fields, lighting the dew-covered grass like 1,000 tiny lanterns. James sat with his hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug, steam curling from the black coffee inside. Beside him, Elena cradled her own mug like it might tell her something she didn't already know. The biscuit sat between them on a plate wrapped in an old kitchen towel, warm, flaky, slightly uneven. His mother's recipe. She'd found the flour tin and made them herself that morning before he'd come in from checking the fence line. He hadn't asked her to. "You really don't use sugar in your coffee?" she asked after a long silence. James shrugged. "Why dress something up just to make it easier to swallow?" Elena smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "So this is what peace tastes like. Bitterness and biscuits." He chuckled once, more or less. They ate in easy silence, tearing pieces of biscuit with their fingers, dipping them in butter, listening to the birds shake off sleep. Elena glanced out at the expanse of green and earth, then at the leaning barn, the crooked fence, the ancient tractor parked half in shadow. She didn't mean to ask the question, not like that. But it slipped out anyway. Why not sell? James didn't move, didn't flinch or sigh or scowl, just took another sip of coffee, as if she'd asked him the weather forecast. "Because this land," he said slowly, "still remembers my father's hands." Elena looked over at him. "He built that fence," James continued, nodding toward the pasture, "planted those trees. Every part of this place is soaked in who he was. Selling it would be like erasing him." The wind picked up gently, ruffling her hair, carrying the faint scent of soil and smoke. Elena didn't reply. She just looked out over the fields again, really looked. And for the first time she understood. It wasn't just land to him, it was memory, it was blood, it was home. The truck rattled down the gravel road, a layer of dried mud caked to its sides, and a hairline crack zigzagging across the windshield. James drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the open window, letting the spring air sweep through the cab. Elena sat in the passenger seat, ponytail pulled through the back of a borrowed ball cap, boots still slightly too big for her feet. She didn't look like a billionaire this morning. She looked like someone used to early hours, and dirt under her nails. They reached town just as the sun hit its stride, casting long, warm shadows across the single stoplight and the old wooden storefronts. Main Street was quiet but not asleep. A few trucks were parked crooked outside the feed store, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery's side door. James nodded at folks as they passed, offering a few clipped greetings. Elena trailed behind him at first, hands in her hoodie pockets, eyes scanning the unfamiliar rhythm of small-town life. Inside the general store, the bell above the door jingled as they stepped in. She stayed close. He moved through the aisles like a man on autopilot. Flour, nails, chicken wire, feed. The essentials. Meanwhile, Elena lingered by the shelves, fingers brushing labels, eyes narrowing in concentration. No designer soaps or imported oils here, just bar soap in paper wrappers, glass jars of raw honey from a farm 3 miles down, seed packets with handwritten tags. She picked up 3 sunflowers, tomatoes, and sweet peas and added them quietly to the cart. The whispers started around the 3rd aisle. People recognized James. They didn't recognize her. That Whitaker's got company. She's not from around here, is she? Too clean for a farmer's girl? James pretended not to hear. Elena did the same. But when they reached the register, the woman behind the counter gave her a long, curious look. "City friend?" she asked James, tone even but pointed. James didn't blink. "Helping out on the farm." The woman nodded slowly, rang up their things. Elena paid in cash. No platinum card, no name offered. Just a small smile and a thank you that felt heavier than it sounded. And when they walked back to the truck, Elena held her little bag of seeds like something precious, like a promise. The night had that soft stillness only country dark can bring. No traffic hum, no street lights humming, just the occasional creak of wood settling and the low rustle of wind through the trees. James had just finished locking up the chicken coop and was heading inside when he noticed the barn door cracked open, a faint slice of lantern glow spilling into the yard. He hadn't left it that way. With quiet steps, he crossed the dirt and pushed the door open further, letting it groan on its hinges. Inside, the air smelled like hay and dust and something older, memories maybe, or maybe just time. He followed the light up the ladder to the loft, where he hadn't set foot in weeks. There, nestled in a makeshift bed of hay bales and old blankets, was Elena. Her back was against the slats, knees pulled up, head tipped toward the rafters where the ceiling had long ago given way to starlight. The lantern sat beside her, flickering low, painting her in amber. She didn't look startled to see him. If anything, she looked like she'd expected him all along. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, voice low enough not to spook the quiet. She shook her head, not looking at him. "I wanted to hear something that wasn't electricity or engines." He stepped closer but didn't sit. "It's quiet here," she said, finally turning to him. "My world's never been quiet, not even at night." James leaned against the support beam, crossing his arms. "Takes some getting used to." "No," she said, "it doesn't. It feels like I've been missing it and didn't know." He let that hang between them. From the loft window, the stars stretched wide and clear, like the whole sky was breathing just for them. No noise, no timelines, no expectations. "I used to come up here as a kid," James said after a pause. "Fell asleep once trying to find the North Star. Woke up with a raccoon chewing my sock." She laughed, quiet and real. Then silence returned, but not the lonely kind, the good kind, the kind that says, "Stay as long as you need." The morning was uneventful in the way only small-town routines can be. James was sorting through spare parts in the workshop, Elena folding laundry on the porch swing with a precision that suggested she'd done this exact motion thousands of times, just never with her own hands. The sky was soft and gray, a break between storms, the kind of day that begged for nothing more than existing. Her bag was by the door, the one she never let far out of reach. A sleek, dark leather thing that didn't match the mud-caked boots she'd grown fond of. She'd left it unzipped this time, distracted by the sound of goats knocking over a water bucket. James passed through the porch without a glance, carrying a box of rusty bolts and trying to remember which ones still had threads worth saving, when a gust of wind flicked open the flap. A folded page fluttered to the floor. He bent to pick it up. It was printed glossy. A page from a magazine, one of those business publications his town didn't subscribe to. The woman on the page looked polished, sharp, dressed in navy and silk. Her name was bold across the top. Elena Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Dynamics, the Billionaire building the future of mobility. The article's headline declared her a genius of innovation, the heiress to a global empire, a powerhouse in heels who had once turned down a buyout offer north of $8 billion. James stared at it for a beat too long. Then he folded the page in half, walked up the porch steps, and held it out. "You dropped this." Elena froze. Her hand still held a dish towel, halfway folded. She met his eyes slowly, like she was bracing for something she'd seen 100 times. Disbelief, awe, greed, maybe even distance. She opened her mouth to explain. James beat her to it. "I figured you had a story." That was all he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a simple, steady truth. She looked down at the folded page. "I didn't mean to lie." "You didn't," he said. "You just didn't tell me everything." Her voice was smaller now. "You're not angry?" He shrugged. "Doesn't change the way you laugh at goats." And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like Elena Whitmore, the name. She just felt like Elena. And maybe that was all she'd ever wanted. They sat on the porch that night long after the dishes were done, after the animals were fed, and after the last of the sun had slipped below the ridge like it didn't want to hear what was coming. The cicadas buzzed in the fields. The stars blinked awake. James leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankle, a mug of cooling coffee in his hand. Elena sat forward, elbows on her knees, fingers laced so tight her knuckles had gone pale. She hadn't said much since the magazine page. Not when he handed it back, not when he asked if she wanted help finishing dinner, not even when he poured her coffee like nothing had changed. But now, with the porch wrapped in that strange intimacy only dark can bring, she spoke. "My full name is Elena Whitmore." James didn't move. "I inherited Whitmore Dynamics when I was 27. My father passed unexpectedly. Heart failure. The board didn't want me, but I made them listen. I turned the company around in 2 years, took us global, put us ahead of every EV and battery tech firm in the country." She swallowed. "That's the part people know." James nodded slightly, just once. She looked down at her hands. "What they don't know is that I haven't slept through the night in 6 years, that I don't have a single friend who isn't paid to like me, that I built this perfect empire, this polished machine of efficiency and progress, and I feel like a ghost inside it." James took a quiet sip of coffee. "I wasn't going anywhere that morning," she continued. "Not a meeting, not a flight. I just drove, turned off my phone, kept going until the road narrowed and the GPS gave up. And when that flood hit, I was scared, but also weirdly calm, like maybe something bigger was finally calling time." She glanced at him then, eyes glossed but dry. "I wanted to be no one, just for a little while." James looked at her, steady as ever. "You don't have to be nobody to feel like somebody here." And in that silence, something heavier than truth settled between them. Acceptance. The calendar on the wall hadn't changed, but everything else had. The days moved quieter now, with a kind of pressure behind them, like the air itself knew what was coming. The farm looked the same, fences patched, animals fed, the porch swept clean each morning, but underneath it all, something was cracking. James felt it in his bones. The letter from the bank sat folded on his nightstand, a thin piece of paper that held more power than it had any right to. 1 week. 7 days until the auction, 7 days until the land his father bled for, the soil his mother planted by hand, the trees he watched grow tall from a swing on the old oak, wasn't theirs anymore. He didn't mention it, not to Elena, not to anyone. He just worked harder, rose earlier, skipped dinner more than once, fixed things that didn't need fixing, because it gave his hands something to do when his mind tried to spiral. Elena noticed. She saw the circles under his eyes, the way he stared out at the ridge a little too long, the quiet that had shifted from peaceful to heavy. She never asked him directly, not once. But on the 6th morning, just as the sun crested the barn roof, she stood by the fence line, holding 2 mugs of coffee and said, "Let me help." James didn't look up from the trough he was scrubbing. With what? You know, with what? He dried his hands on a rag and finally met her eyes. "Not your problem." "That's where you're wrong, Elena. I don't care if you don't want charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering partnership." He shook his head. I won't be some billionaire's project." She stepped closer, voice softer now. "You're not a project, James. You're the first real thing I've touched in years. This place, this land, they matter. And if you think I'd stand here and let it all get taken because of pride, then you don't know me at all." The silence stretched between them, taut and raw. James looked away, but he didn't say no. The check was on the table between them, freshly torn from a leather-bound checkbook that looked wildly out of place against the chipped wood and faded placemats of James's kitchen. Elena had written it fast but carefully, her signature fluid and practiced, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. And maybe she had. The number was large. More than enough to pay off the debt, enough to patch the roof, replace the tractor, maybe even rebuild the barn with money left over to breathe. But James just stood there, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Take it," she said, gently sliding it forward. "It doesn't have to mean anything. Just make the call, pay the bank, and keep what's yours." He didn't move. "James, I told you," he said, voice low but firm. "I'm not a man who gets saved by a blank check." Elena stepped closer, frustration flickering beneath her calm. "This isn't about pride. It's about survival." He met her eyes then, and for the first time there was something sharp in his. "No, it's about ownership, about dignity. You think throwing money at this land makes it yours? That I'd rather lose it to a bank than take your help? Maybe I would if this is what help looks like." "It's not about owning anything," she said, a little breathless. "It's about not letting it die. I don't want to buy it, James. I want to save it." He looked down at the check, then reached forward slowly, picked it up between two fingers, held it in front of her, and ripped it straight down the middle. The halves fluttered to the table like fallen leaves. Elena stared, stunned. James stepped back. "I don't need saving," he said, voice steady now, almost quiet. "I need a partner, someone who gets their hands dirty, someone who stays when the weather turns, not someone who signs a check and calls it love." Elena blinked hard, the moment pressing in around them. She didn't pick up the pieces, she just nodded, barely. "Okay," she said, "then let's do it your way." It started as a joke, really. They were sitting on the tailgate after morning chores, sharing a jar of peach preserves and the last 2 biscuits from yesterday's batch, when Elena, sticky fingers and all, said, "You know, if you can make jam this good and still owe the bank money, you're doing something very wrong." James raised an eyebrow. "And what's your brilliant billionaire solution?" She grinned. "We sell it. All of it. Eggs, veggies, honey, right at the edge of the road. No middlemen, no markup, just a stand, a hand-painted sign, and your charm." He smirked. "You think I'm charming?" "Your eggs are," she said, licking jam from her thumb. By the next morning it wasn't a joke anymore. They cleared space near the fence line, just where the gravel drive met the 2-lane road. James found old planks behind the barn, still sturdy if you hammered around the rot. Elena rolled up her sleeves and got to work, wielding a hammer like it had offended her personally. They built the counter from an old door, propped up on hay bales and crates. Elena painted a sign, "Whitaker Farm Stand," with a steady hand and green paint that matched the first spring buds on the trees. James watched her work, arms crossed, brow raised. "You've done this before?" "I've never touched a paintbrush outside of kindergarten," she said, focused on her brush strokes. "But I've branded entire product lines. This can't be that different." It wasn't perfect. The stand leaned slightly left. The lettering dried uneven. But when they stood back and looked at it, both of them a little sunburnt, a little sweaty, it felt like something real, something earned. James filled the bins with eggs, jars of honey, and a few bundles of radishes. Elena set a small cash box on the counter and added a tin for change with a handwritten note. "Take what you need, pay what you can." When the first car pulled over that afternoon, a mother with 2 kids and a wrinkled $5 bill, James looked at Elena. She didn't say a word, just smiled. And in that moment the farm didn't feel like it was fading anymore. It felt alive. By Saturday morning, the air buzzed with the kind of anticipation that only small towns can create, subtle, word of mouth. A whisper passed in church pews and checkout lines. No one had made an announcement. No one needed to. People had seen the stand, new, hand-painted, sitting proud by the road like a flag planted in defiance of something bigger. And so they came. At first it was just Mrs. Lively, the pastor's wife, pulling up in her minivan with her 3 grandkids in tow. She bought 24 eggs and a jar of honey, claiming she hadn't tasted anything that good since '89. Then came Roger from the feed store, who swore he was just passing through, but left with a basket of radishes and a tin of peach preserves. Then came more and more. They came on foot in old trucks, with dogs riding in the back and toddlers sticky with melted popsicles. They browsed the small display, asked where the soap came from, if the chickens were free-range, if the tomatoes were from seed. And when they found out the stand was run by James Whitaker, the man who fixed your flat at midnight and never charged you full price, they bought everything without hesitation. Elena stood behind the counter, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, sunlight catching in her eyes as she handed out change and refilled the egg cartons. She laughed with old women who remembered her from somewhere, and winked at kids who didn't know what radishes were but wanted them anyway. There was dirt on her hands, flour on her cheek, and not a trace of boardroom polish left in sight. James watched from the side, arms crossed but lips twitching into something dangerously close to pride. By noon the honey was gone, the preserves sold out, and the eggs down to the last carton. A man in a pressed shirt offered to buy the whole next week's batch in advance. Someone else asked if they'd ever thought about expanding. Elena just smiled and said, "One stand at a time." James stepped beside her, sun-warmed and speechless, watching a line still forming down the drive. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like survival. It felt like a future. The ridge looked different at night, quieter, lonelier, but softer somehow, like even the wind knew to hush. James pulled the tractor up slow, its old engine humming low as he eased to a stop just beneath the oak tree that had stood watch over the valley for longer than either of them had been alive. The headlights stayed on, casting twin beams across the field like 2 lanterns lit for nobody but them. Elena hopped down from the side rail with a soft thud, brushing hay off her jeans. She was still in the same clothes from the market, tired, a little smudged, still glowing from the sun, and the stream of people who'd treated her not like a mogul, but like a neighbor. The kind that mattered. "Why here?" she asked, looking out over the moonlit spread of farmland below. James leaned against the front tire, arms folded, hat pushed back on his head. "It's the one place where everything feels small, in the right kind of way. Not insignificant, just manageable." She stepped beside him, so close their shoulders almost touched. "I used to have a view from my office window," she said softly. "You could see the whole city from 30 stories up. But this feels like the first time I've actually seen something." They stood there for a while, the glow of the tractor lights bathing the ridge in gold, the distant sounds of night animals humming beneath it all. Elena let out a quiet laugh. "Do you think anyone in your town has figured out who I am yet?" James shrugged. "Maybe, but they're polite enough not to care." She turned to face him then, and he could see it, all of it. The weight she'd been carrying, the freedom she was finding in the dirt, the question she wasn't asking out loud. He didn't move. So she did. She stepped forward gently, like testing a porch step that might creak, and placed her lips on his. No fanfare, no hesitation, just real and warm and honest. James didn't pull away. The tractor hummed, the oak tree swayed, and for a moment the whole world felt still. The jet arrived just after noon, low, sleek, and out of place in a sky that usually saw nothing bigger than crop dusters and lazy hawks. It landed at the county airstrip 10 miles out, where the only terminal was a converted barn, and the fuel pump still took paper logs. James heard about it before he saw it. Word travels fast in a town that runs on coffee and conversation. By the time the black SUV rolled up the gravel drive, he was already on the porch, wrench in one hand, grease on his jaw. Elena was inside kneading bread dough, flour dusting her sweatshirt, hair tied up with a red bandana she'd found in the drawer next to the coffee filters. She hadn't been checking her phone. Not for days now. The door opened behind him. "Visitors?" she asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. He nodded toward the vehicle. "Your people, I'm guessing." Out stepped three men in tailored suits, creased slacks, polished shoes, Bluetooth earpieces. One of them held a tablet. Another, a phone already ringing in his hand. The tallest approached, all business and urgency. "Elena," he said, offering a tight nod. "We've been looking for you. There's a crisis with the Q4 initiative, and the Tokyo partners are demanding a direct call. We've prepped the jet. You'll be back by morning." She didn't respond right away, just looked at them, then at James, then down at her hands, still dusted with flour. "I'm not getting on the plane." The man blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not going." Another suit stepped forward. "With respect, ma'am, this isn't optional. The board needs you in New York tonight." "I'm not in New York anymore," she said calmly. "And I'm not your ma'am." James didn't say a word, just watched from the porch, a ghost of something like awe flickering behind his steady gaze. One of the men gestured toward the road. "We can wait an hour if you need time." Elena crossed her arms. "You can leave now." They stared, unsure, and then she turned back toward the house, back to the bread, back to the life she wasn't supposed to want, but suddenly couldn't imagine walking away from. The wind rolled in gentle that evening, bending the tall grass in slow waves, as if the land itself were listening. James was fixing the gutter on the back of the barn, trying to beat the next rain, when he noticed Elena sitting on the porch steps, phone in hand, brows knit, breath measured. She hadn't touched the thing in days, but now she was holding it with purpose. He watched her raise it, set it against her knees, hit record. No makeup, no lighting crew, just sunset spilling across her face, freckles showing through from days spent outside, hair in a loose braid she'd done herself, no CEO polish, no branding, just Elena. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "My name is Elena Whitmore," she began. "Some of you know me as the founder and CEO of Whitmore Dynamics. For the past decade, I've spent my life building something that was supposed to change the world." A pause. "It did change things, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what it means to live." James froze mid-reach, one hand still gripping the ladder. "I disappeared a few weeks ago, not to make a statement, not to stage a rebellion. I ran. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found it." She glanced off to the side then, past the camera, toward the field beyond the porch. "I found more wealth in muddy boots and honesty than I ever did in the boardroom. I've met people who live with less, but feel more. People who fix things not for credit, but because it's the right thing to do." Another pause, this one deeper. "I'm not stepping down, but I am stepping back. From the noise, from the chase, from the illusion that success has to come at the cost of peace." She ended the recording without flourish. No press release, no spin, just truth. Later that night she uploaded it, unfiltered, unedited, to every platform that had once swallowed her voice. She didn't read the comments, didn't check the views. She just walked back to the barn where James was waiting and helped him hold the ladder steady. And for the first time in her life, Elena didn't care who watched, only who stayed. The kitchen table had never seen a business meeting like this. No glossy spreadsheets, no catered lunch, just two chipped mugs of coffee, a notebook with chicken scratches and seed stains, and a pencil chewed halfway down the barrel. James leaned over the pages, tapping a calloused finger against a hand-drawn diagram. Elena sat across from him in a flannel shirt 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled to the elbows, eyes sharp but soft in a way that didn't belong to boardrooms anymore. So we start with 5 farms, she said, sketching a quick star beside each location on the map. Local, no more than a county away. Shared supply chain, pooled transportation, collective pricing. James nodded slowly. And no middlemen. Exactly. Everyone sells direct. Produce, dairy, preserves, eggs, all under one brand. He looked at her. What do we call it? She smiled, tilted her head. How about the Honest Harvest Co-op? James sat back. The name hung in the air like something that had always been there, just waiting to be spoken. And you're really going to fund this? He asked, not skeptical, just stunned. I already did, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were contracts, seed money allocations, and a budget scrawled in her own handwriting. This isn't charity, James, it's a partnership. You give it the roots, I give it the wings. He opened the folder, flipping through the pages. Legal terms and timelines stared back at him, but none of it felt heavy. None of it felt like pressure, because it wasn't about saving one farm anymore. It was about building something new. He looked up at her, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Outside, the wind lifted the curtain slightly. A chicken clucked somewhere in the yard. The smell of earth and coffee and possibility thickened the air. All right, James said, offering his hand across the table. Let's build it. Elena took his hand without hesitation, fingers clasped, plan in place. And just like that, the man who never asked for help and the woman who once had everything but peace were no longer trying to hold something together. They were building something better. The first tree went into the ground just after sunrise. James knelt in the soil, palms dirty, back stiff from the hours before, but a quiet contentment resting on his shoulders. Elena stood beside him with a sapling in her arms, bare branches, fragile and waiting, roots bound in burlap and hope. She handed it to him like something sacred, and he took it without a word. They didn't talk much that morning, didn't need to. The orchard expansion had started as a sketch in the corner of their co-op plan, just a circle marked future. But when Elena saw the empty field behind the barn, her eyes had lit up. Why not now, she had said, hands already on her hips, daring the earth to argue. So now they were here. Together, they dug wide and deep, letting the cold earth coat their hands like memory. James showed her how to cradle the roots just right, how to pack the soil firm but not too tight, how to whisper that silent promise every good farmer makes to the ground. I'll take care of you if you take care of us. They planted peaches first, her idea. She wanted color, wanted sweetness that came with time, then apples. Rows of them, lined neatly like quiet soldiers who'd one day bloom. Think they'll take? She asked, wiping her brow with the sleeve of her flannel. James glanced at the horizon. If they're anything like you, they'll do just fine. She didn't blush, but she did smile in that way she always did when he surprised her, like he'd pulled something from the sky she didn't know she needed. By late afternoon, the last tree stood tall in the dirt. They stepped back, side by side, shoulders brushing, staring at a field that looked empty to anyone who didn't know better. But James knew, and so did she, because what they'd planted wasn't just fruit, it was roots, commitment, a beginning. Years from now, someone else would bite into the sweetness of it all, never knowing who put it there. But they would. They always would. The town square was dressed in autumn, the kind of crisp, warm beauty that made the whole world feel like a postcard. Booths lined the sidewalks, kids ran past with caramel apples and sticky fingers, and a bluegrass band played under the old gazebo with more soul than skill. The annual Harvest Festival had always been a big deal in this town, but this year it felt different. James stood near the edge of the crowd, arms folded, a quiet smile on his face, as he watched Elena step up onto the makeshift stage. She wore jeans and boots caked with orchard dust, her flannel sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. No one saw a billionaire. They saw someone who'd helped dig fence posts, carry crates, laugh in the rain, cry when the first tree took root. The mayor handed her the microphone with a grin. "You've earned the last word, Miss Whitmore." She took it, held it for a moment, then glanced out over the sea of faces, some familiar, some still new, all watching. "When I came here," she began, voice strong but steady, "I didn't mean to stay." The crowd quieted. "I was running from a life that looked perfect on paper but never felt like mine. I didn't come here to be seen. I didn't come here to change anything. But then—" She paused, eyes drifting to James, who met her gaze without flinching. "You changed me." She looked back at the crowd. "You welcomed a stranger. You taught me how to dig, how to fall in the mud, how to laugh without pretending. You didn't ask for credentials. You didn't care about my last name. You just let me show up as I was." A few heads nodded, soft murmurs rippling through the crowd. "And now," she said, her voice catching just slightly, "I'm not a stranger anymore. I'm one of you. And this place, these fields, this town, is home." The applause started small, then rolled into a wave. Not loud, not explosive, just honest. The kind that said, "You're right, you belong here." And for Elena, that meant more than any boardroom ever had. The orchard was quiet that evening, golden light slipping through the rows of young trees like it had been saving its warmth just for them. The peach saplings had taken to the soil better than anyone expected, already sprouting green at the edges, and the apple trees stood taller than they had just weeks before, as if they knew they were being watched. Elena walked between the rows in her usual way, slow and barefoot, basket on one arm, collecting wind-fallen apples not yet bruised. Her hair was down, wind-tossed, her smile soft, easy. She didn't notice James at first, standing under the tallest tree they'd planted together, hands tucked into his jeans pockets, something small, glinting in the fading light beside his boot. When she finally saw him, she paused, brow lifting in quiet curiosity. "You lost something?" she teased, stepping closer. "Found something," he said. She tilted her head. "Oh yeah? What?" He bent down, picked up the little wooden box resting in the grass. It was weathered and crooked, like it had spent its life in a drawer with old bolts and memories. Inside, nestled in a square of denim, sat a ring, rough, imperfect, shaped from tractor washers, a barn nail, and a whole lot of stubborn patience. It wasn't polished, it wasn't shiny. But it was his. And it was hers. "I can't give you a yacht," James said, stepping forward, voice low and sure, "or a penthouse, or a name that'll open any doors." Elena's eyes were glassy now, but she didn't speak. "But I can give you this land, these trees, my hands, my promise that every day I'll show up and love you like it's the only job that ever mattered." He opened the box. She didn't even look at the ring. She just looked at him. "Yes," she whispered. James slipped the ring onto her finger, crooked, homemade, perfect. The breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere a cricket chirped. The world kept moving. But in that little orchard, on that patch of earth they'd built from nothing but work and faith, time stood still, just long enough to let love take root. The news van pulled up just after lunch, kicking up a trail of dust behind it as it crawled down the long gravel drive like it wasn't sure it belonged. James spotted it first from the barn loft and muttered something under his breath as he climbed down. Elena was in the orchard, basket in one hand, pruning shears in the other, when she heard the engine hum. She didn't flinch. She just straightened, brushed a curl from her cheek, and started walking toward the house. The last time she'd seen this woman, a sharp-eyed reporter named Cassidy Lean, it had been in a Manhattan boardroom, cameras flashing, the air electric with scandal. "Elena Whitmore vanishes mid-quarter. Markets panic," the headline had screamed. Now Cassidy stood on the porch with a notepad in hand and a producer trailing behind her, holding a mic like it was fragile. "Elena?" Cassidy said with a practiced smile. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk." Elena handed her apple basket to James, who didn't say a word, just nodded once before disappearing back inside. I figured it was time, Elena said, voice even. You've got your story? Let's make sure it's the right one this time. They sat on the porch steps. No lights, no makeup. No press agent hovering just out of frame. Cassidy hit record. I ran, Elena said, staring past the reporter toward the tree line. Not from the company, not from responsibility, but from a life that felt like it belonged to everyone but me. Cassidy's pen paused. I landed here by accident, Elena continued, in the middle of a flood, on a piece of land I didn't recognize but somehow already missed, and there was a man who didn't ask my name, didn't care about it. He just handed me his coat. What made you stay? Cassidy asked quietly. Elena smiled. Because it's the first place I didn't feel like I had to earn my worth. I just had to show up, get muddy, and be decent. Cassidy nodded slowly, words failing for once. And when the segment aired later that week, nationwide, viral within hours, it didn't open with a scandal or a dramatic reveal. It opened with a porch, a peach tree, and Elena Whitmore saying, "This is home." The boardroom hadn't changed. Glass walls, city skyline, long table gleaming beneath clinical lights. The scent of pine cleaner and money still clung to the air. Suits sat around the table, backs straight. Expressions carefully neutral. They'd flown in from London, Singapore, San Francisco. She'd once felt powerful here. Now it just felt hollow. Elena sat at the head of the table, wearing jeans and a blazer that didn't quite hide the calluses on her hands. She didn't flinch under their gaze. She didn't apologize for the dirt still under her nails. When she opened the folder in front of her, no one said a word. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said. "I'm here to let go." There was a flicker of motion, papers rustling, someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. She glanced at the woman beside her, Ruth Mercado, her longtime COO. Ruth had been in the trenches with her since the first prototype. Smart, steady, honest. She was the only one Elena trusted to hold the reins. "I'm signing over my voting seat on the board," Elena continued, pen poised above the paper. "Effective immediately, Ruth will represent my shares, and she'll guide this company with the kind of quiet brilliance that built it from the start." Someone cleared their throat. "Elena, are you sure?" She didn't look up. "I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in years." A pause. The pen moved. Signature sealed. When she finally looked around the room, she saw confusion in some eyes, respect in others, but no one dared challenge it. She stood slowly. "I built something here," she said. "Something powerful, something profitable, but it was never supposed to be a prison." Her voice softened. "I found my legacy elsewhere, in a field of apple trees, in hands that work without needing to be seen, in a man who never asked what I was worth, just whether I'd stay." She turned to Ruth, handed her the folder. "You'll do better with it than I ever did." Then she left. No cameras, no applause, just the sound of her boots on tile and a world she no longer needed behind her. The barn smelled of fresh hay and wildflowers, with sunlight spilling through the open doors in long golden ribbons. The old oak beams had been swept clean, draped with string lights and mason jar lanterns that swayed gently in the late summer breeze. Tables were set up just outside, covered in patchwork linens and hand-picked bouquets, sunflowers, lavender, baby's breath. There were no seating charts, no caterers, just covered dishes and folding chairs borrowed from the church down the road. Elena stood in the doorway, barefoot in a simple white dress that hit just above her ankles, lace soft at the edges, her hair falling in loose waves down her back. No veil, no heels, no designer label, just a heart that felt steady for the first time in years. James waited beneath the rafters, wearing a button-up shirt that had probably seen more than one county fair, and suspenders held together by stubbornness and pride. His boots were scuffed, hands clean for once, and in them he held a ring box carved from the same oak that held up the roof above them. The music started, just a fiddle, a guitar, and a woman from town with a voice like cracked porcelain, Elena walked slowly, passing rows of neighbors and friends. Mrs. Lively wiped a tear. The mayor grinned wide. Even the goats in the pen nearby quieted, as if they understood the weight of the moment. When she reached James, he didn't say anything at first, just looked at her like she was both miracle and memory, and maybe a little of both. The ceremony was short. No vows written in gold script. No readings from poets or priests, just two people standing where they had built everything from the ground up, promising to keep doing it together. "I do," she said, voice clear. "I always did," he answered, sliding the handmade ring on her finger, barn nail and all. And when they kissed, it wasn't perfect. It was real. Outside, the lanterns began to flicker as the sun dipped low, and laughter rolled across the fields like music. No suits, no stage, just love. And home. It went up on a quiet morning, just after the last of the guests had gone, and the dishes from the wedding had been washed, dried, and stacked in mismatched towers on the kitchen shelves. The sky was soft with overcast light, the kind that made everything look a little more honest. James stood at the entrance to the farm, a shovel in one hand, the other holding the base of the wooden post steady. Elena knelt beside him, paintbrush still damp, a smear of white across her wrist where she'd leaned too close to the sign before it dried. They'd worked on it for days in the old tool shed, him measuring, her sketching, both of them arguing playfully over fonts. It wasn't fancy, just carved pine, hand-painted letters, and a weatherproof finish James swore by. But when they hoisted it into place, something in the air shifted, like the land itself exhaled. Carter and Whitmore Homestead, built on shelter, grown with love. It wasn't about branding. It wasn't about making a statement to the world. It was a promise, to each other, to the land, to anyone who passed by and needed a place to believe in. Elena stepped back, squinting at the alignment. "It's a little crooked." James nodded. "Good. So are we." She smiled, slipping her arm around his waist. "Think anyone will know what it means?" "They will when they get here." And people did come, some for eggs, some for advice, some just to see the place the whole town had whispered about. The orchard grew taller. The farm stand needed a second shelf, and the porch always had an extra chair, but that sign stayed the same, unpolished, unassuming, unmissable, and every time they drove through the gate, James at the wheel, Elena beside him, dirt on their boots and laughter in the cab, it reminded them that some stories aren't written in boardrooms or headlines. They're carved by hand, nailed into the earth, and left to weather with grace. The orchard was in full bloom, rows of apple trees stretching wide with branches heavy in spring blossoms. The scent of fresh soil and wildflower honey lingered in the air, carried by the soft breeze that rustled the fence line, where a young girl stood, eyes wide with curiosity. She was maybe 9 or 10, with a braid down her back and a notebook clutched to her chest. Elena crouched beside a cluster of potted herbs near the stand, fingers brushing through mint leaves. When she noticed the girl watching, she smiled, wiping her hands on her apron, and walked over. "Can I help you?" Elena asked gently. The girl tilted her head. "Are you the lady who lives here?" "I am." The girl nodded, then flipped open her notebook. "I'm doing a school project. We're supposed to write about a place that feels like home." Elena leaned on the fence post beside her. "Good place to start." There was a pause, then a more curious question. "How did you meet your husband?" Elena looked out at the orchard, the rows she had helped plant, the farmhouse just visible beyond the hill. The man she loved, bent over a wheelbarrow, humming some old tune to himself as he worked. She smiled, eyes warm. "I found shelter from a storm," she said softly, "and never left." The girl blinked. "Was it a big storm?" "The biggest," Elena said with a soft laugh. "Not just outside, inside too." The girl scribbled in her notebook, nodding like she understood more than her years should allow. Elena didn't offer more. She didn't mention the flash flood, the broken-down car, or the past she'd walked away from. She didn't say the words CEO or Billionaire, those didn't belong here, not anymore. Instead, she knelt, picked a small blossom from a peach branch, and tucked it behind the girl's ear. "Tell your teacher this place wasn't built overnight," she said. "It was built slowly, by hand, with heart, and with someone who never once asked for anything but the truth." The girls smiled wide, and somewhere behind them, James called out, "Elena, you going to help me plant these or just flirt with our visitors?" She laughed, waved him off, and turned back to the girl. "Go write your story," she said. "Then come back and live one."